Listen closely. Can you hear it? That hollow echo in your chest where desire used to live? It sounds like footsteps running away from you in an endless corridor, each step matching the frantic beat of your pursuing heart. I once knew a man who collected butterflies, not the dead ones pinned to boards. No, he was more ambitious than that. He wanted them alive, fluttering in glass cases throughout his apartment. For months, he chased rare specimens through humid jungles and scorching meadows. His hand, once steady as a surgeon's, developed a tremor from reaching, always reaching. The more butterflies he caught, the faster they seemed to die in captivity. Their wings, meant for wind and wildflower nectar, crumbled like autumn leaves against the glass. By winter, his apartment was a mausoleum of empty cases. The butterflies had all escaped or expired, but something worse had happened. He could no longer see beauty in their flight. Where once a monarch's migration might have stopped his breath, now he saw only potential prisoners, calculations of net angles and cage dimensions. The chase had murdered wonder itself. "This is Jung's first law," whispered in the shadows of every therapist's office, carved into the bathroom mirrors of broken men. What you chase disappears. Not because the universe is cruel, though it often seems that way at 3 a.m. when you're scrolling through her Instagram again, but because the act of chasing fundamentally alters both the hunter and the hunted. Consider the physics of desire. When you pursue someone with the desperate energy of a drowning man reaching for driftwood, you create a vacuum. Nature, as even high school dropouts know, abhors a vacuum. The harder you grasp, the more violently the universe pulls away. It's Newton's third law applied to the heart. For every action of desperate wanting, there is an equal and opposite reaction of cosmic indifference. The ancient Sufis knew this. They told the story of Majnun, who loved Layla so fiercely that he went mad, wandering the desert, writing her name in the sand until his fingers bled. But here's the part they don't tell you in the sanitized versions. Layla loved him too at first. It was his pursuit that transformed her from woman to mirage. The more he chased, the more she became an idea rather than flesh. By the time he finally found her, years later, neither recognized the other. She had become too real. He had become too much of a ghost. Modern psychology confirms what the mystics intuited. A 2024 study from the University of Copenhagen found that individuals who scored highest on pursuit intensity in romantic contexts experienced a 73% higher rate of relationship dissolution within the first year. The researchers called it the paradox of effort. The more energy you invest in capturing someone's attention, the more you signal your own inadequacy. But it goes deeper than mere statistics. There's something almost supernatural about the way desire warps reality. Have you ever noticed how the person you're desperately texting seems to develop a sixth sense for your neediness? How they begin to smell your wanting through the screen? It's as if desperation secretes a pheromone that repels at the molecular level. I knew a woman once. Brilliant neurosurgeon, could thread a catheter through a blood vessel with her eyes closed, who fell for a mediocre guitarist. The kind who played Wonderwall at parties and thought it was ironic. She pursued him with the same precision she brought to brain surgery. Mapped his routines, learned his favorite coffee order, oat milk cortado with a half pump of vanilla. Even taught herself guitar to casually jam with him. You know how this ends, don't you? Of course you do. You've been there, in your own small way, haven't you? Standing outside someone's apartment at midnight, phone in hand, crafting the perfect, spontaneous text. Tell me, did it work? Or did they smell the choreography in your casualness? The guitarist predictably lost interest the moment she mastered bar chords. But here's the twist. She kept playing. Long after he'd ghosted her, she found herself alone with the instrument, and something strange happened. The music, freed from the burden of strategy, began to flow. She's still playing today, in a jazz quartet that performs at underground clubs. She never speaks his name, but sometimes, in the middle of a complex improvisation, you can hear the ghost of Wonderwall, transformed into something beautiful and unrecognizable. This is the cruelest joke of all. What we chase often disappears precisely because our chasing changes us into someone who no longer truly wants it. We become so fixated on the pursuit that we forget why we started running in the first place. The butterfly collector, had he simply sat still in a garden, might have had monarchs land on his shoulders. But sitting still requires a kind of strength that our culture never teaches men. Nietzsche wrote, "The thought of suicide is a great consolation. By means of it, one gets through many a dark night." I propose a gentler variation. The thought of stopping the chase is a great liberation. By means of it, one discovers what actually wants to come to you. Here's something they won't tell you in any self-help book, something that would get me banned from most relationship forums. The people who have others constantly chasing them aren't playing hard to get. They're simply busy being themselves. They're the ones sitting alone in cafes, lost in books, not checking their phones every 30 seconds. They're painting terrible watercolors on Sunday afternoons, learning dead languages for no practical reason, taking long walks without documenting them for social media. Tell me, and be honest now, we're alone here in this dark. When was the last time you let something come to you? When did you last sit so still that the universe had no choice but to move toward you instead? The fever dream of wanting is just that, a fever. And fevers eventually break. What remains afterward is either wisdom or emptiness. The choice, paradoxically, was never yours to make. It was decided the moment you started running. Every woman you've loved is a ghost haunting someone you used to be. There's a room in your mind, don't pretend it isn't there, where you keep them all. The women who once made your hand shake. Each one preserved in amber light, frozen at the exact moment you loved them most. But here's what Jung knew, what he whispered to his patients between pipe smoke and long silences. You're not collecting women in that room. You're collecting versions of yourself. Walk with me through this museum. Can you smell it? That mixture of old perfume and regret, like flowers left too long in a vase? The first exhibit. Ah, there she is, your first real love. Notice how young you look standing next to her memory. That boy with his uncertain smile and too much hair gel, who thought love meant memorizing every song she mentioned in passing. He's still there, that version of you, playing her favorite album on repeat in the museum's first wing. Forever 22. Forever believing that loving someone hard enough could make you worthy of being loved back. The Tibetans have a practice called sky burial, where they leave bodies on mountaintops for vultures to consume. They understand what we've forgotten, that holding on to the dead poisons the living. But we don't do sky burials for our former selves. We stuff them into mental basements, these ghosts of who we were when we loved someone who couldn't love us back. Or worse, someone who did love us back, but loved a version of us we couldn't sustain. I met a man last winter who showed me his phone. 63,000 photos. My life, he said, scrolling through endless documentation. But I noticed something. After each relationship ended, there was a gap. 6 months, a year, sometimes longer, no photos at all. I delete them, he admitted. All the pictures with her in them. But here's what haunted me. You could still see the ghosts. In group photos, there would be an awkward space where someone had been cropped out. Selfies where he was clearly looking at someone just outside the frame. His entire digital history was full of these phantom limbs, these careful erasures that only made the absence louder. This is what we do, isn't it? We think we're erasing them, but we're actually erasing ourselves, the self that loved them, that was stupid enough or brave enough or broken enough to try. But those selves don't disappear. They multiply in the darkness, breeding like bacteria in a petri dish of memory. A 2025 neuroscience study from Stanford found something extraordinary. When shown photos of former partners, the brain doesn't just activate memory centers. It reconstructs entire neural pathways that existed during that relationship. You literally become who you were then, if only for milliseconds. The researchers called it temporal self-collapse. I call it the curse of having loved. Consider Orpheus, that fool with the lyre, who loved Eurydice so much he walked into hell for her. Everyone focuses on how he looked back and lost her forever, but the older versions of the myth tell a different truth. He looked back because he had to, not from weakness, but from a terrible wisdom. He realized that the Eurydice he was bringing back wouldn't be the same woman who died, and more terrifying, he wouldn't be the same man who mourned her. The underworld had changed them both. Looking back was the only honest thing to do. You carry your own underworld, don't you? Populated by the ghosts of every woman whose leaving carved another room in your museum. The one who left you for someone who wasn't afraid of happiness. The one you left because she loved you in a way that made you see yourself too clearly. The one who simply dissolved, like sugar in rain, until one day you realized you were talking to empty air. But here's the savage joke. Each ghost is anchored to a ghost of yourself. The you who believed in forever? He's frozen in amber with your college girlfriend. The you who thought cynicism was wisdom? He's chain-smoking eternally with that bartender who collected damaged men like vintage vinyl. The you who almost became happy? He's the hardest to visit, standing there with, what was her name? The one whose laugh made you forget your own damage, if only for Sunday mornings. When did you last visit him, that almost happy ghost of yourself? Or do you avoid that wing of the museum entirely? Kierkegaard wrote about repetition, the impossible desire to live a moment again. But he missed the darker truth. We don't want to relive the moment. We want to relive being the person who lived that moment. We want to be naive again, hopeful again, stupid again. We want to unknow what we know. There's a man I correspond with, we've never met in person, who sends me letters about his ex-wife. They divorced 15 years ago, but he still writes about her as if she left yesterday. Not because he wants her back, he's very clear about that, but because when she left, she took with her the last version of himself he actually liked. I miss him, he wrote in his latest letter. The man who believed in surprise flowers and breakfast in bed, she got to keep him in the divorce. This is why men become bitter. Not from the leaving is just whether it happens, but from the accumulation of selves we can no longer access. We become haunted houses, full of rooms we can't enter, filled with versions of ourselves we can no longer be. And the women? They become the keys to those locked rooms, which is why we hate them and idealize them in equal measure. The ancient Greeks had a word, pothos, for the longing for something absent. But they distinguished it from other forms of desire. Pothos wasn't about wanting something you'd never had. That was epithymia. Pothos was specifically the ache for something you'd possessed and lost. They understood. We don't miss the women. We miss who we were when we knew them. Modern men collect these ghosts like trophies, as if accumulating enough might somehow add up to a complete person. But here's what Jung knew. What he learned from decades of listening to broken men in quiet rooms. The museum is a trap. Every ghost you feed grows stronger, while the living self, the one who could still become something new, starves. There's only one way out, and it's so simple it sounds like mockery. You have to burn the museum down. Not with anger. Anger just creates new ghosts, but with something far more dangerous. Acceptance. Acceptance that every version of you that loved and lost is gone. That the women who haunt your memory are mourning their own ghosts of you. That the museum itself is just another room, and you've been the curator of your own haunting. Late at night, when you're scrolling through old photos or reading old texts. Yes, I know you saved them. Remember this. Ghosts only have the power you feed them. And every moment you spend in that museum is a moment you're not spending becoming someone new. Someone who hasn't loved yet. Someone who hasn't lost yet. Someone who might, if you let him, surprise you. But that would mean leaving the museum. And we both know how warm it is in there, surrounded by all that beautiful damage, all those careful catastrophes, all those women who proved you could feel something, even if that something was just exquisite pain. The door is always open. You locked it from the inside. Solitude is not the absence of others. It's the presence of yourself. Listen, do you hear that? That's the sound of no one needing you. It's the most terrifying music in the world, and the most necessary. I'll tell you a secret that would have me excommunicated from every dating coach's altar, banned from every men's group that preaches the gospel of constant connection. The cure for loneliness isn't other people. The cure for loneliness is becoming someone you can stand to be alone with. There's a monastery in the mountains of Japan where monks take a vow of silence that lasts 9 years. 9 years. No words, no gestures, just pure existence stripped of its social costume. Most Westerners hear this and shudder. 9 years without validation? Without someone reflecting back your worth? Without the constant static of other people's needs drowning out the terrifying question of what you actually want? But here's what happens in year 7. I know because I interviewed one of them, through written notes, his handwriting like spider silk. I discovered I had been performing myself for so long, I'd forgotten there was someone beneath the performance. The silence didn't take my voice. It gave it back. We live in an age that has pathologized solitude. A 2024 meta-analysis labeled chronic aloneness as dangerous as smoking 2 packs a day. Self-help gurus peddle connection like cocaine. Join a community, they scream. Find your tribe! As if the answer to not knowing who you are is to surround yourself with more people who don't know who they are either. But Jung knew better. In his Red Book, that magnificent descent into madness he kept locked away for decades, he wrote, "The spirit of the depths forced me to speak to my soul, to call upon her as a living and self-existing being, not to speak to others, to his soul, in solitude, in the terrible privacy of his own mind." Here's what they don't tell you about being alone. It's not empty. It's so full it might split you open. Full of every voice you've been avoiding, every dream you've been deferring, every version of yourself you've been too cowardly to become. Other people aren't company. They're cover. They're the white noise you use to avoid the conversation you need to have with the stranger who wears your face. I once spent 6 months in a cabin in Montana. No internet, no phone. Just me and the mountains, and a vindictive wood stove that required constant attention. The first month, I nearly lost my mind. I talked to myself, to the trees, to a spider that had built its web in the corner of my bedroom. I created entire relationships with hikers who passed by once and never returned. My mind, deprived of its usual diet of other people's opinions, began eating itself. But somewhere in month 3, something shifted. The constant commentary in my head, that exhausting play-by-play of self-judgment and future projection, went quiet. Not silent, but quiet, like a radio turned down to a whisper. And in that quiet, I heard something else. Not a voice, exactly. More like a frequency. The sound of my own existence, uncorrupted by performance. This is what terrifies us about solitude. The possibility that we might discover we're not who we've been pretending to be. That stripped of our audience, we might cease to exist. Or worse, that we might discover we never existed in the first place. That we've been nothing but a collection of mirrors reflecting other people's expectations. The Gnostics had a word. Kenosis. Self-emptying. They believed you had to become absolutely empty before you could be filled with anything real. But modern men flee from emptiness like medieval peasants from plague. We stuff every moment with stimulation, every silence with podcasts, every solitary walk with phone calls. We've become apostles of our own absence, preaching the gospel of anywhere but here, anyone but ourselves. When was the last time you ate a meal without watching something? Took a walk without earbuds? Sat in a room without reaching for your phone? Can you even remember what your own thoughts sound like without the backing track of someone else's content? There's a brutal calculus to solitude. Every hour you spend desperately avoiding yourself is an hour you could have spent becoming someone worth being. Every relationship you enter to escape loneliness is a relationship doomed by your own emptiness. You cannot give what you do not have, and you cannot have what you've never stayed still long enough to receive. A composer I knew, brilliant man, wrote symphonies that made grown men weep, told me the secret of his music. I don't write in the notes. I write in the silence between them. The notes are just there to make you notice the silence. He lived alone for 40 years, not because he couldn't find someone, but because he'd found something rarer: himself. When he died, 300 people came to his funeral. He'd touched more lives through his solitude than most touch through constant company. This is the paradox that breaks men's minds. You become most attractive when you stop needing to be attractive. You become best company when you no longer need company. You become capable of real love only when you stop needing love to complete you. Schopenhauer, that magnificent pessimist, wrote about hedgehogs in winter, how they huddle together for warmth but prick each other with their spines. So they separate, get cold, huddle again, an endless dance of need and pain. But he missed the third option: becoming a creature that generates its own heat. The ancient Stoics practiced something called premeditatio malorum, imagining loss before it happens. They'd visualize their loved ones dying, their possessions vanishing, their status crumbling. Modern therapists would call this catastrophic thinking, but the Stoics knew you can't lose what you don't depend on, and you can't depend on anything outside yourself without becoming its slave. Here's a truth so uncomfortable it borders on cruelty. Every moment you spend running from solitude is a moment you spend running from the only person who will definitely be there when you die. You can divorce wives, alienate children, lose friends, but you can never leave yourself. And if you've spent your whole life avoiding that self, death becomes not just an ending, but a final, terrible introduction. But here's the flip side: the secret hidden in the terror. In real solitude, not loneliness, which is failed solitude, but real, chosen, conscious aloneness, something extraordinary happens. You stop performing. You stop translating yourself for others' consumption. You stop being a character in your own life and become, finally, impossibly real. The cabin in Montana burned down 2 years after I left. Lightning strike, they said. When I heard, I felt nothing. Not because I didn't care, but because what I'd found there wasn't in the cabin. It was in me. Portable, permanent. Mine. This is what Jung meant when he wrote about individuation. Not becoming someone new, but becoming who you always were, beneath the costumes and scripts and desperate performances. It requires a kind of courage our culture doesn't recognize. The courage to be disliked, to be misunderstood, to be alone without being lonely. But you're still running, aren't you? Still filling every silence, still afraid of what you might find if you stopped. Tell me, what would happen if you turned off everything right now and just sat with yourself for 1 hour? What are you so afraid you might discover? The apostle of one's own absence preaches to empty rooms, but the apostle of one's own presence, he doesn't need to preach at all. His existence is the sermon. His solitude is the scripture. His comfort with himself is the only conversion that matters. What you release returns transformed. What you grip becomes a corpse. Picture this: a man standing at the edge of the ocean, fists clenched around water. The harder he squeezes, the faster it escapes through his fingers. He's crying, from frustration or salt spray, it doesn't matter, cursing the sea for not letting him own it. This is you. This is all of us. This is the human condition in a single, pathetic image. But watch what happens when he opens his hands. The water doesn't stay. Water never stays. But something else occurs. His palms cup naturally, becoming vessels. The next wave fills them without effort. He can't keep the ocean, but for a moment, the ocean keeps him. The alchemists knew something we've forgotten in our age of algorithms and optimization. They spent centuries trying to turn lead into gold, but the real transformation, the one they coded into their cryptic symbols, was far stranger. They discovered that letting go of something didn't mean losing it. It meant allowing it to become what it was meant to be, which was usually something far more valuable than what you were trying to make it. There's a story from medieval Prague, whispered in the crooked alleys near where the old Jewish quarter used to stand. A merchant loved a woman who sold flowers in the market. Every day he bought her entire stock, thinking this would make her love him. But the flowers denied their purpose. rotted in his storeroom. The woman, denied her livelihood, grew to hate him. Only when his warehouse burned down, flowers, building, and his need to possess her, did she see him clearly. They say she brought him a single rose from her new garden, not as a gift, but as a teaching. Beauty shared multiplies, beauty hoarded dies. Jung called this enantiodromia, the tendency of things to become their opposite when pushed to extremes. The more desperately you cling to love, the more surely it transforms into obsession. The tighter you hold your identity, the more brittle it becomes. The harder you chase happiness, the more it reveals itself as mania in a pretty dress. I'll tell you about the most successful relationship I ever witnessed. Two physicists, married 43 years. Their secret? Every morning, they chose each other anew. Not out of habit or obligation, but from a place of complete freedom. I release you, they'd say to each other over coffee. And I choose you. They understood what mystics have always known. Possession is the opposite of love. Love is the daily practice of letting someone be free and discovering they still want to orbit your sun. But we're addicted to gripping, aren't we? Look at your hands right now. I'm serious. Look at them. Are they clenched, even slightly? That's your default state. Grasping, holding, afraid. We clutch our phones like prayer beads, our relationships like life rafts, our identities like armor against a world that keeps demanding we change. A 2025 study on attachment patterns found something devastating. The tighter someone reported holding on to relationships, the higher their cortisol levels, even in sleep. Their bodies were literally poisoning themselves with the effort of not letting go. The researchers called it biological hoarding, the cellular consequence of spiritual constipation. What are you holding on to right now that's already dead? Which corpse are you dragging through your days, pretending it's just sleeping? The Buddhists have a meditation where you imagine your own decomposition, flesh falling away, bones bleaching in the sun, even the bones eventually becoming dust. Westerners find this morbid, but there's a ferocious joy hidden in it. Everything you're so desperately protecting is already gone. Your youth? Gone. Your potential? Transformed into whatever you are now. That person who left you? They left the moment they thought about leaving. You've been holding on to an after-image, a retinal burn of something that stopped existing long before it walked out the door. But here's where the alchemy happens. In the releasing, not the dramatic bridge-burning release of the wounded ego. That's just another form of holding on, inverted. Real release is quieter. It's the moment you realize you've been carrying a stone in your pocket for years and simply let it fall. No ceremony, no Instagram post about letting go and letting God. Just the quiet thud of something heavy becoming part of the earth again. I learned this from my grandfather, though he never said it in words. Alzheimer's took him piece by piece. First his keys, then his words, then his memory of my name. I watched my family rage against each loss, trying to hold on to who he'd been. But he, even in his dissolution, seemed almost amused. One day, in a moment of clarity, he looked at me and said, "I'm becoming lighter. Not sadder, not less, lighter." He was practicing the ultimate alchemy, transforming loss into liberation. Each forgotten name was a chain broken. Each lost memory was weight he no longer had to carry. By the end, he was so light, he seemed to glow. He'd let go of everything, including the need to be someone in particular, and in doing so, became pure presence. This is what we refuse to understand. Letting go isn't about loss. It's about transformation. The Greeks had two words for time: chronos, tick-tock time, and kairos, the right time, the pregnant moment. You can't force kairos. You can only create the conditions for it by releasing your death grip on chronos. Every man I've known who found real love, not the desperate clutching we call love, but the real thing, found it after he stopped looking. Not because the universe rewards giving up, but because giving up transformed him into someone capable of receiving. The muscles used for grasping are different from the muscles used for accepting. You can't do both simultaneously. There's a Turkish proverb: when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But they've mistranslated it. The original is more precise. When the student releases the need for a teacher, teaching appears. It's not about readiness. It's about release. The teacher was always there. Your need was the blindfold. Right now, in this moment, you're holding on to something that's killing you slowly. Maybe it's a vision of who you should be. Maybe it's rage at who you're not. Maybe it's that message you've typed and deleted 100 times. The one that starts with, "I've been thinking about us." Delete it for real. This time. Not because it's wrong to want connection, but because the you who needs to send that message is already dead. He died the moment you realized you were performing your pain for someone who isn't watching. Let him go. Light a candle for him if you must, but let him go. The alchemists failed to turn lead into gold because they misunderstood the metaphor. Lead doesn't become gold. Lead, released from the need to be anything but lead, reveals its own perfect leadness. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the world needs lead more than gold. Your grip is the only prison that matters. Your release is the only key that works. And between them, in that space where transformation happens, something is waiting to be born. Not the thing you wanted, but the thing you need. Not the thing you chased, but the thing that was always chasing you, waiting for you to stop running long enough to be caught. Open your hands, right now. Feel that? That's not emptiness. That's space. That's potential. That's the whole universe, waiting. Your wounds are not your weakness. They're your only, honest teachers. Here's a confession from the bottom of a whiskey glass at 3 a.m. The kind of truth that only emerges when all the prettier lies have gone to sleep. Every man who has ever mattered was broken in precisely the right way. Not broken like a cheap toy. Discarded and useless. Broken like light through a prism. Separated into colors that were always there, but needed the perfect flaw to be revealed. This is what Jung spent his whole career trying to tell us, while we kept asking for ways to be fixed. The wound is the place where the light enters you. The Japanese have a practice called kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold. The Western mind misunderstands this as making broken things beautiful, but that's our sickness talking. Our obsession with transformation as escape. Kintsugi isn't about beauty, it's about truth. The gold doesn't hide the cracks, it illuminates them. It says, "This is where the breaking happened. This is where the story lives." Let me tell you about the most complete man I ever met. A boxer, past his prime, face like a map of every punch he'd taken. His nose had been broken so many times it had given up trying to be a nose and settled for being a suggestion. His hands were gnarled into permanent half-fists. By every metric our society uses to measure worth, he was a failure. Too many losses, too much damage, too far from whatever he might have been. But young fighters sought him out like pilgrims to a shrine. Not for his technique. There were better technicians. Not for his record. There were more successful coaches. They came for something else, something that lived in his spectacular damage. He could see their fears before they knew they were afraid. He could spot the exact moment when a fighter was about to break, because he'd been broken in every possible way and survived. "Your fear isn't your enemy," he'd tell them, touching his ruined nose. "Your fear is your radar. It's showing you exactly where you need to grow. The only men who don't feel fear are the ones who've never tried anything worth failing at." This is what we've forgotten in our age of optimization, our cult of perpetual improvement. There is wisdom that can only be bought with wounds. There are teachings that can only be received through failure. There are parts of yourself you'll never meet unless someone breaks your heart so thoroughly that you have to rebuild it from scratch. And in the rebuilding, discover you're the architect you were waiting for. A 2024 longitudinal study followed men who'd experienced what researchers called catastrophic romantic failure, the kind that leaves you drinking wine from the bottle at noon on a Tuesday, writing emails you'll never send. 5 years later, 73% reported higher life satisfaction than their pre-catastrophe baseline. But here's the beautiful, terrible detail. The improvement was directly proportional to how completely they'd allowed themselves to break. The ones who'd tried to maintain dignity, to fail gracefully, they stayed stuck. The ones who'd howled at the moon, who'd made absolutely spectacular fools of themselves, they were the ones who emerged transformed. What's your sacred damage? Not your pretty wounds, the ones you've learned to speak about in therapy-approved language. I mean the ugly one, the one that still makes you flinch, the one you've built your entire personality around avoiding. When did you last look at it directly? There's a story, probably apocryphal but true in the way that matters, about Carl Jung's first heartbreak. The woman, her name changes depending on who tells it, left him for someone simpler, someone who didn't spend nights wrestling with the collective unconscious. Jung, the story goes, disappeared into the mountains for 3 weeks. When he returned, his friends expected devastation. Instead, they found him eerily calm, almost luminous. "What happened up there?" they asked. "I met the part of me that needed her," he replied. "I sat with him until he died. It took 3 weeks. He fought hard, but now I'm free to meet the part of me that doesn't." This is the secret teaching hidden in every spiritual tradition, wrapped in metaphor because the truth is too sharp to handle directly. Resurrection requires death. Not metaphorical death, real death of real parts of yourself. The death of the you who believed love could save you. The death of the you who thought success would make you whole. The death of the you who was certain that if you just found the right person, the right job, the right philosophy, you'd finally be okay. These deaths hurt exactly as much as real death. Sometimes more because you have to keep walking around afterward, wearing the same face, pretending to be the same person when you know you're not. Can never be again. But here's what they don't tell you about sacred damage. It's generative. Each wound that goes deep enough opens a spring. Not immediately. First there's blood, then there's infection, then there's the long, ugly healing where nothing seems to happen. But eventually, if you don't rush to seal it with the usual bandages of distraction and denial, something else emerges. Call it wisdom. Call it depth. Call it the earned knowledge that you can survive your own destruction. The men who change the world are never the intact one. Look closely at anyone who's ever mattered. The artists who create from their obsessions. The leaders who understand suffering because they've housed it in their bones. The quiet ones who know how to sit with the broken because they've been shattered and rebuilt so many times they've lost count. Rumi, that mad, drunk mystic, wrote, "Sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment." But bewilderment isn't confusion. It's the state of having your familiar world broken open to reveal the strange truth underneath. It's what happens when your carefully constructed identity meets reality and loses. Badly. I keep a photo on my desk of a tree that was struck by lightning. Half of it is charred black, dead beyond recovery. But from that dead half, new growth has emerged, not despite the damage, but because of it. The lightning opened channels in the wood that weren't there before. The new growth is following the scar tissue, using the path carved by catastrophe. This is your choice, the only one that matters. You can spend your life trying to avoid the lightning, building elaborate shelters of routine and relationship and achievement. Or you can accept that the lightning has already struck, multiple times in fact. And the question isn't whether you're damaged, but whether you'll let the damage teach you what it came to teach. There's a freedom that comes with accepting your own wreckage. Not the false freedom of, "I don't care about anything," which is just another fortress, but the real freedom of, "I've been broken in every way that matters, and I'm still here." The freedom of knowing there's nothing left to protect, no image left to maintain, no perfect version of yourself to disappoint. Your wounds aren't your weakness. They're your credentials. They're your qualification to speak about love to those who've only known infatuation, about loss to those who've never risked enough to lose, about survival to those who've never been tested past their limits. The sacred damage isn't something to be healed. It's something to be honored, to be integrated, to be transformed from a source of shame into a source of terrible, beautiful wisdom. The kind of wisdom that can only be earned one scar at a time. So tell me, and tell yourself, what if you stopped trying to fix yourself? What if you stopped seeing your damage as something to overcome and started seeing it as your particular genius? What if the thing you've been running from is actually the thing you came here to teach? The wound is where the light enters, but only if you stop trying to seal it shut. Only if you let it breathe. Only if you accept that you were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be real. And real things, beloved, are always broken in the most exquisite ways.